Every star you see in the night sky will one day burn out. Every civilization, no matter how grand, eventually fades into the cosmic dust from which it came. And for every living thing on this small blue planet, there is an inevitable end. Death is the one experience that connects us all, from the smallest microbe to the largest whale, from ancient kings to future explorers of distant galaxies. It's a fundamental part of the cosmic story. We have told stories about it, sung songs about it, and built monuments to try and understand it. It is perhaps the ultimate mystery that has captivated human thought since we first looked up and wondered about our place in the universe. Throughout history, we have tried to make sense of this final frontier. We've developed complex rituals, elaborate mythologies, and profound philosophies to grapple with the idea of non-existence. Is it a journey to another realm? Is it a peaceful sleep from which we never wake? Or is it simply the end of a biological process? These questions have driven art, religion, and science for millennia. They reflect a deep, innate curiosity about our own nature and our destiny. This shared curiosity is what makes us human. It fuels our quest for knowledge, pushing us to peer through telescopes and microscopes, searching for answers in the vastness of space and the intricacies of a single cell. But in our modern age, we have a new tool to explore this ancient mystery: science. Science offers a different kind of story, one not based on faith or tradition, but on evidence, observation, and repeatable experiments. It invites us to look at death not as a supernatural event, but as a natural process, a part of the grand cycle of life and matter in the universe. By understanding the biology, chemistry, and physics of what happens when we die, we can strip away some of the fear and superstition that has long surrounded this topic. This scientific perspective doesn't diminish the wonder. Instead, it deepens our appreciation for the incredible, complex, and finite experience we call life. This journey into the science of death is not meant to take away the personal or cultural meanings we hold. Instead, it's an invitation to add another layer of understanding. Think of it as looking at a beautiful painting. You can appreciate its emotional impact from a distance, or you can step closer and see the intricate brushstrokes and the mixture of colors that create the whole picture. Science gives us that closer look. It allows us to examine the brushstrokes of our own biology, to see how the masterpiece of a life is constructed, and how, eventually, its elements are returned to the cosmic canvas to be used again. When we talk about death, what are we really talking about? In our daily lives, we might think of it as a single moment, a switch being flipped from on to off. But from a scientific standpoint, it's not so simple. Death is a process, not an instant. Doctors and biologists have developed specific criteria to define it, moving from a simple observation to a more nuanced understanding. The most traditional definition is cardiac death. This is the moment your heart stops beating. When the heart ceases to pump, blood flow stops, and oxygen can no longer reach the vital organs, including the brain. For centuries, this was the undisputed sign that life had ended. However, modern medicine has complicated this picture. We now have machines that can keep the heart beating and the lungs breathing even when the brain has completely ceased to function. This led to the concept of brain death. Brain death is defined as the irreversible loss of all brain function, including the brainstem, which controls essential automatic activities like breathing. A person who is declared brain dead has no consciousness, no thought, no sensation, and no ability to breathe on their own. Even if machines keep their body functioning, they are considered legally and medically dead. This distinction is crucial for modern medicine, especially in the context of organ donation. But the process continues even deeper, down to the very building blocks of your body. This is cellular death. After the heart and brain have stopped, individual cells and tissues don't all die at once. They shut down at different rates depending on their need for oxygen. Skin cells, for example, can remain alive for up to 24 hours after the rest of the body has been declared dead. This is why certain tissues can be harvested for transplantation long after death has occurred. It shows that the end of an organism is a cascade of events, a slow-motion shutdown that ripples through the entire biological system, from the whole person down to the microscopic level. So the scientific definition of death is a multi-layered concept. It begins with the cessation of the heartbeat, cardiac death, leads to the irreversible failure of the brain, brain death, and concludes with the gradual shutdown of all individual cells, cellular death. Understanding these stages helps us see death not as a terrifying void, but as a biological transition. It's the final chapter in the story of a complex organism, a systematic disassembly where the components that once made up you begin their journey back to the fundamental elements from which all life on Earth is built. It's a return to the cosmos. What happens inside our minds during those final moments? This is one of the most profound and difficult questions for science to answer. For a long time, it was assumed that when the heart stopped, the brain shut down almost instantly due to a lack of oxygen. It was thought to be a quick fade to black. However, recent scientific studies are painting a much more interesting and complex picture of the dying brain. It seems our brain doesn't just switch off, it puts up one final remarkable fight. A last burst of neurological activity that is both fascinating and mysterious. Studies on animals, and more recently on a few human patients who happened to be monitored by EEG machines during their unexpected passing, have detected a surprising surge of highly organized brain activity in the moments just before and even shortly after the heart stops. This burst of activity involves high-frequency brain waves known as gamma waves, which are associated with complex cognitive functions like consciousness, memory recall, and perception. It's as if the brain, faced with its own shutdown, ignites in a final, coherent blaze of neural firing. This could be the neurological basis for the vivid experiences some people report from near-death events. This final flash of brain activity is not random noise. It appears to be a coordinated global event across different regions of the brain. Some scientists speculate that this surge could be the brain's last-ditch effort to make sense of its state, or perhaps it's responsible for the life review phenomenon, where a person's entire life seems to flash before their eyes. The brain, flooded with stress hormones and deprived of oxygen, may be triggering a cascade of neural processes that unlock deep memories and create a heightened state of awareness, a final intense experience of consciousness before everything fades. Of course, this is a frontier of neuroscience, and there is still so much we don't know. The data is limited, and interpreting it is a challenge. We cannot ask a dying brain what it is experiencing. But these findings open up a new window into the dying process. They suggest that the transition from life to death might be more of a dimming of the lights with a final brilliant spark, rather than an abrupt power outage. It shows that even in its final moments, the 3-pound universe inside our skull is an extraordinary and active place, performing one last spectacular act in the theatre of life. Humanity has always filled the gaps in its knowledge with stories and myths, and death is no exception. These tales can be comforting, but they often clash with what we've learned through scientific observation. One of the most persistent myths is that your hair and fingernails continue to grow after you die. This appears to be true because the skin around the nails and on the scalp retracts as it dehydrates after death. This dehydration exposes more of the nail and hair follicles, creating the illusion of growth. In reality, all cellular activity, including the cell division required for growth, stops very soon after death. Another common belief is the idea of a so-called death rattle, a frightening sound that is often interpreted as a sign of suffering or a struggle to breathe. While the sound can be distressing to loved ones, it is not an indication of pain. This noise is caused by the relaxation of the throat muscles, which allows saliva and bronchial secretions to accumulate in the back of the throat. The person is typically unconscious and unaware of this process. The sound is simply the air from the lungs passing through this fluid. It is a passive mechanical process, not a conscious struggle for life. Many people also believe that you can be scared to death. While intense fear or shock can trigger a massive release of adrenaline, which in a person with a pre-existing heart condition could potentially lead to a fatal cardiac arrhythmia, it's not the fear itself that is the killer. The phrase is a dramatic oversimplification. The cause of death would be a physiological event, a heart attack, brought on by an extreme emotional state. A healthy person is extremely unlikely to die from fear alone. The body is resilient, and its fight or flight response is designed for survival, not self-destruction. Then there is the myth that the body sits up or moves on its own after death. This is often featured in horror movies, but it has a basis in a real, though misunderstood, biological phenomenon. As the body's tissues begin to break down, muscles can contract and relax in a process called rigor mortis. This can cause small, reflexive twitches or movements in the limbs or torso. These are not purposeful actions. They are the result of chemical changes in the muscle fibers. Understanding the science behind these events helps us separate fearful fiction from natural fact, replacing superstition with a calm, rational view of the body's final processes. Among the most compelling and personal stories related to death are near-death experiences, or NDEs. These are the profound psychological events reported by people who have been on the brink of death, or even declared clinically dead and then revived. The accounts often share remarkable similarities, regardless of the person's cultural or religious background. Common themes include the feeling of floating outside one's own body, moving through a tunnel toward a brilliant light, meeting deceased relatives or spiritual beings, and experiencing an overwhelming sense of peace and love. For many who have them, these experiences feel more real than reality itself. From a scientific perspective, we cannot simply dismiss these powerful life-altering experiences. Instead, we must ask, what is happening in the brain to produce them? Researchers have proposed several neurobiological explanations. The out-of-body sensation, for example, could be caused by a disruption in the brain's temporoparietal junction, an area that helps integrate sensory information to create our sense of self and its location in space. When this region is under stress from lack of oxygen or other trauma, it might fail to create a coherent self-image, leading to the feeling of being detached from one's physical body. The tunnel and the bright light can also be explained by physiological processes in the dying brain. As blood flow and oxygen to the brain decrease, the visual system can begin to shut down from the periphery inward. This could create the effect of tunnel vision, with a narrowing field of view that ends in a single point of light. The intense light itself might be a result of the surge of electrical activity we discussed earlier, or the release of certain neurotransmitters in the brain's visual cortex, creating a powerful internal hallucination. The feelings of euphoria and peace could be linked to the release of endorphins, the body's natural painkillers, in response to extreme stress and trauma. While these scientific explanations provide a plausible framework, they don't necessarily negate the profound personal meaning of these experiences. Science describes the how, the neurological mechanics, but it doesn't fully explain the why of the content or the transformative impact on the individual. The fact that the brain can construct such a rich, structured, and meaningful narrative during a moment of extreme crisis is in itself a testament to its incredible power. NDEs remain a fascinating intersection of neurology, psychology, and personal belief, reminding us that the experience of dying is as complex as the experience of living. Perhaps the biggest question of all is what happens to consciousness. Is the you that thinks, feels, and experiences the universe simply a product of the intricate wiring of your brain? When the brain dies, does that you cease to exist entirely? This is the central question where science and philosophy meet. The dominant view in neuroscience is that consciousness is an emergent property of the brain. This means it arises from the complex interactions of billions of neurons firing in concert. Much like the properties of water emerge from the interaction of hydrogen and oxygen atoms. From this perspective, consciousness is fundamentally tied to the biological hardware that produces it. If the brain is the computer, consciousness is the software running on it. When you turn off the computer, when the brain ceases to function, the software stops running. There is no evidence in mainstream science to suggest that consciousness can persist in the absence of a functioning brain. The memories, personality, and sense of self that make you who you are encoded in the physical structure and chemical pathways of your neural networks. When that structure dissolves, so too does the consciousness it supported. The matter that made you is recycled back into the cosmos, but the specific pattern that was you is gone. However, this is not the only idea out there, though it is the one with the most scientific backing. Some thinkers, including a few on the fringes of physics and philosophy, explore other possibilities. They might ponder if consciousness is more fundamental to the universe than we currently believe, perhaps existing as a property of space-time itself. In this view, the brain might act more like a radio receiver, tuning into a signal of consciousness that is already present in the cosmos. If this were the case, then the destruction of the receiver, the brain, wouldn't necessarily mean the end of the signal, consciousness. It is crucial to state that these alternative ideas are highly speculative and not supported by our current scientific evidence. They exist in the realm of hypothesis and thought experiments. For now, The overwhelming weight of evidence from biology, medicine, and psychology points to the conclusion that our individual consciousness is a finite biological phenomenon. It is a beautiful, fleeting flame generated by the incredible complexity of our brain. This makes our conscious moments all the more precious. It means the time we have to experience the universe, to learn, to love, and to wonder is a rare and wonderful gift. Despite all our scientific progress, we must be humble and admit that we don't have all the answers. Science is a process of discovery, and the boundary of our knowledge is always expanding. We have a good map of what happens to the body and brain, but the subjective personal experience of dying, the first-person perspective, remains locked away. What does it truly feel like as consciousness fades? Is there a final thought, a final sensation? These questions may be forever beyond the reach of third-person scientific inquiry. Science can measure brainwaves, but it cannot measure a soul. Furthermore, the ultimate origin of consciousness itself is still one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in all of science. We can point to the brain regions associated with it, but we can't explain why or how a collection of cells processing electrical signals gives rise to the rich inner world of subjective experience, the redness of a rose, the sound of music, the feeling of joy. Until we solve this hard problem of consciousness, our understanding of what is truly lost at death will remain incomplete. We are still just scratching the surface of the most complex object in the known universe, the human brain. But perhaps the greatest lesson science teaches us about death is not about endings, but about beginnings. It tells us that we are made of stardust, the carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen forged in the hearts of long-dead stars. We are a temporary arrangement of atoms that have, for a brief flicker of cosmic time, woken up to contemplate the universe. Our existence is a link in an unbroken chain of life stretching back billions of years. When we die, that matter and energy are not destroyed. They are returned to the Earth and the cosmos, ready to become part of something new. A plant, a star, perhaps even another conscious being billions of years from now. Ultimately, looking at death through the lens of science does not have to be a source of fear. It can be a source of profound appreciation. Knowing that our time is finite can inspire us to live more fully, to cherish our relationships, to seek knowledge, and to marvel at the sheer improbability of our own existence. It encourages us to make the most of the short, brilliant time we have to be conscious observers of this magnificent cosmos. The universe was here long before us and will be here long after us. And that's okay, because for a little while we got to be a part of it.